Imagine this, it is 50,000 years ago. There is no central heating, no supermarket, no thick duvet you panic bought from Amazon, no Netflix to distract you from the fact that you are absolutely, catastrophically freezing. There is just you, a cave, maybe a fire, if you were lucky enough to keep it alive. And outside, a wall of snow, a wind that could rip through bone, and animals that would very much like to eat you before you get a chance to eat them. This is winter, ancient style, and somehow, our ancestors not only survived it, they thrived. They had children, they made art, they told stories, and they figured out entirely from scratch how to keep the human species alive through some of the most brutal cold periods this planet has ever seen. So today, we are going to find out exactly how they did it. And trust me, some of this is going to genuinely impress you. Some of it is going to horrify you. And some of it is going to make you feel very, very grateful for your thermostat. Let's go. First, let us set the scene, because the winters ancient humans dealt with were not just a bit nippy. We are talking about the Pleistocene epoch, a period stretching from roughly 2.6 million years ago all the way to about 12,000 years ago. During this time, the Earth went through repeated ice ages, glaciers the size of countries pushed down from the poles, sea levels dropped by over 100 meters, and temperatures in parts of Europe and Asia regularly plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius. That is not a typo, minus 30. To put that in perspective, that is colder than a domestic freezer. That is, your eyelashes freeze in seconds, cold, and our ancestors were out there in it. No Gore-Tex, no hand warmers, no emergency services to call if things went wrong. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, but surely early humans just followed the animals south for the winter, right? Like birds? And the answer is sometimes yes, but often no. Because migrating is exhausting, dangerous, and you are essentially abandoning everything you have built. Your shelter, your cached food, your knowledge of the local terrain. A lot of groups stayed put and toughed it out. So how? Let us break it down. Let us start with the most obvious problem, the cold. When you are a modern human, you solve cold with a boiler and a thick coat. When you are an ancient human, you solve cold by being extraordinarily clever with the materials around you. The most famous solution, and one you have definitely pictured, is the cave. Caves were genuinely excellent shelters. They provided natural insulation from wind and snow, maintained a relatively stable internal temperature, and crucially, they had a ceiling and walls, which even the most optimistic hunter-gatherer would agree is a solid starting point for a home. But here is the thing most people do not realize. Caves were actually prime real estate. Not every group had access to one. In flat, open landscapes, like the vast plains of Ice Age Europe and Asia, there simply were no caves to retreat to. So what did they do? They built. Archaeological sites across Ukraine, Russia, and the Czech Republic have revealed something extraordinary. Structures made almost entirely from mammoth bones. Yes, mammoth bones. These were not small structures either. Some were up to 10 meters across, built from the skulls, jawbones, and leg bones of dozens of individual mammoths, all interlocked together and almost certainly covered with animal hides to create an insulated, windproof dome. Think about that for a second. These people looked at the bones of the largest land animal in their world and thought, yeah, that is a house. Archaeologists call these structures mammoth bone huts, which is technically accurate but wildly undersells how impressive they are. These were engineered shelters, deliberately constructed, requiring the cooperation of multiple people over an extended period, and they worked. Inside a well-constructed, hide-covered structure, even in extreme cold, a small group of people and a central hearth could maintain a livable temperature. Speaking of which, fire. Possibly the single greatest discovery in human history. The evidence for controlled use of fire by our ancestors goes back at least 400,000 years. By the time of the Neanderthals and early modern humans navigating Ice Age winters, fire was not a novelty. It was a non-negotiable survival tool. But maintaining fire in a winter environment is not as straightforward as it sounds. Getting wet wood to ignite at -20 degrees with freezing fingers while the wind is trying to undo everything you're doing, that is a proper challenge. Ancient humans solved this in a few ways. First, they stockpiled dry fuel before winter hit. Birch bark was particularly prized. It burns even when slightly damp because of its natural oil content. Dried animal dung was also used extensively. It sounds unpleasant, it was also genuinely effective. Second, and this one is fascinating, they carried fire with them. There is evidence that groups transported live embers over long distances using materials like tinder fungus, a slow-burning fungal material that can hold a smoldering coal for hours wrapped in bark or leaves. Essentially, a portable fire. The job of keeping that ember alive on a long journey was almost certainly one of the most important responsibilities in the group. You let the ember die, you might not get another one. Lighting fire from scratch, using a bow drill or striking flint was skilled, time-consuming work that did not always succeed in cold, wet conditions. So the ember carrier was not just useful, they were essential. The most important person in the group, arguably, was the person walking very carefully and not tripping over anything. And around that fire, something else happened, something that goes beyond keeping warm. Fire kept predators away. Cave hyenas, cave lions, and wolves were all active in Ice Age Europe and all perfectly happy to view a small group of cold, tired humans as dinner. A fire burning through the night was a deterrent, a security system, and a psychological anchor. It was also, and this matters more than people give it credit for, a social space. Fire is where ancient humans gathered, where stories were told, where knowledge was passed down, where the group became something more than a collection of freezing individuals. Fire did not just keep their bodies alive, it kept their culture alive, right? Let us talk about what they were wearing, because this is where ancient humans honestly deserve a standing ovation. The oldest direct evidence of clothing comes from around 120,000 years ago. Eagle talons and pigmented shells found alongside Neanderthal remains, suggesting deliberate body decoration. But actual hide clothing? That goes back at least 80,000 years, based on the presence of specialized bone tools used for scraping and softening animal skins. The process of making effective cold weather clothing from animal hides is not simple. You cannot just drape a dead deer over your shoulders and call it a day. Well, you can technically, but it will rot and stiffen and become completely useless within days. To make a durable, insulating, weather-resistant garment, the hide needs to be processed. This involves scraping away all remaining fat and membrane from the inner surface, stretching and working the hide while it dries to prevent stiffening, and then, critically, tanning, either through smoke, animal brain matter, or plant materials, all of which chemically alter the hide to make it supple and resistant to decay. Ancient humans knew all of this. They figured it out empirically, through generations of trial and error, and they passed the knowledge down. But here is what makes Ice Age clothing particularly impressive. Around 25,000 years ago, in sites across Russia and Eastern Europe, archaeologists have found evidence of something even more sophisticated: woven textiles and what appear to be sewn, fitted garments. They had needles, bone needles, some barely 2 centimeters long, with actual eyes in them, meaning they were sewing, carefully, precisely, creating fitted layers rather than just wrapping skins around themselves. This is not primitive, this is tailoring. In the Ice Age, the layering principle they used is actually the same principle modern cold weather clothing is built on. Trap warm air close to the body, protect the outer layer from wind and moisture. A base layer of soft, worked hide, a middle layer of thicker fur, an outer layer of heavier, weatherproofed skin. They independently arrived at exactly what modern outdoor clothing brands charge you £400 to replicate. Here is where things get genuinely interesting, and occasionally grim, but mostly interesting. The core challenge of winter survival, beyond staying warm, is calories. Your body burns far more energy staying warm in cold temperatures. You need more food in winter, at exactly the time when food becomes hardest to find. So how did ancient humans eat through winter? Strategy 1. Hunt large animals in autumn. mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, reindeer, bison, horse. These were the megafauna of the Ice Age world, and a single large kill could provide enormous amounts of meat. One mammoth, conservatively, provided around 900 kilograms of usable meat. That is a lot of calories. But you cannot eat 900 kilograms of mammoth in one sitting, so you preserve it. And here is the clever part. In an Ice Age winter, you had the world's best refrigerator available to you at all times. The ground, permafrost, permanently frozen ground, extends across vast areas of Siberia, northern Europe, and northern Asia. At the sites of ancient settlements in these regions, archaeologists have found storage pits dug into the permafrost containing preserved animal bones and meat. They were literally using the frozen earth as a freezer, which, when you think about it, is genius. Pure, straightforward genius. Strategy 2. Fat. This sounds simple, and it is, but do not underestimate it. Fat is calorically dense, roughly twice the calories per gram of protein or carbohydrate. In cold environments, fat is survival. Ancient humans prioritized fatty cuts. Marrow, the fatty, calorie-rich material inside large bones, was extracted and consumed or preserved. Animal fat was rendered and stored. And crucially, humans in cold climates craved fat the way we might crave carbohydrates. It was a biological imperative. There is actually a documented condition called rabbit starvation, where you eat only lean meat with no fat content and your body essentially cannot extract enough energy from it. You can eat constantly and still starve. Ancient humans knew intuitively that fat mattered. They saw it specifically. They selected for it in their hunts. Strategy 3. Plants, nuts, and storage. Late summer and autumn saw intensive gathering of nuts, berries, roots, and seeds. Hazelnuts in particular were enormously important, calorie-dense, storable for months, and found across temperate Europe. Archaeological sites regularly turn up vast quantities of charred hazelnut shells, suggesting they were roasted and stored in significant quantities. Wild grains, dried berries, and root vegetables could also be dried and cached. These were not the primary calorie source in deep winter, but they provided dietary variety and micronutrients that pure meat diets lack. Strategy 4. Fish, rivers and coastlines in Ice Age. Europe were rich in fish, and there is strong evidence that ancient humans exploited them year-round. Ice fishing, cutting holes in frozen rivers to access fish beneath, almost certainly occurred, though direct archaeological evidence is naturally limited. Smoked and dried fish, however, can last months. A good summer salmon run, properly preserved, contributed meaningfully to winter food stores. There is one more dimension to surviving winter that does not get talked about nearly enough. The psychological one. Imagine 4 to 6 months of limited daylight, extreme cold, confined spaces, and the ever-present awareness that you might not have enough food to make it to spring. That is a profound psychological burden, and yet ancient humans made art. The cave paintings of Lascaux, Altamira, and Chauvet, some of the most spectacular art ever created, were made during the Ice Age. The artists worked by flickering firelight deep inside cave systems, painting aurochs and horses and bison with a level of skill and naturalism that genuinely astonishes modern artists. They carved figurines. The Venus figurines, small stone or ivory sculptures of female forms found across Europe and dating back 40,000 years. They made music. Bone flutes dating to around 43,000 years ago have been found in Germany, functional instruments capable of playing melodies. They were not just surviving winter, they were making it beautiful. The art and music and storytelling of the Ice Age served multiple purposes. They were almost certainly tied to ritual and belief, to social cohesion, to the passing of knowledge through narrative, but at a fundamental level, they also represent something deeply recognizable: humans refusing to let the darkness win. Long winter nights, gathered around a fire, with stories and music and art, that is not so different from what we still do. So, how did ancient humans survive winter? They built homes from mammoth bones. They carried fire across frozen landscapes like it was the most precious thing in the world, because it was. They tailored fitted clothing from animal hides using needles smaller than your finger. They dug freezers into permafrost and rationed every calorie with precision. They looked after each other. They made art by firelight in the deep dark of winter caves. They did not just survive, they built the foundations of everything that came after. Every fire lit in a hearth, every carefully stored meal, every piece of warm clothing you pull on without thinking. All of it traces back to solutions that ancient humans worked out from scratch in conditions most of us would not last a week in. Next time you complain about the cold, and I will absolutely still complain about the cold, maybe spare a thought for the person standing in -20, keeping an ember alive in their cupped hands, making sure the group makes it to spring. Because they did, and that is why you are here.